Okay. I'm Jim. Hi. If you guys have questions, you pop them in. I'll try and answer as I go. Um, if I go off on a tangent, you can knock me back. Um, Sebastian, when I came across him and we started discussing this because of his students, and we had a talk about the Georgetown work, and he's like, "Hey, do you want to do a talk?" I was like, "Cool." And we kind of decided to discuss some of the publisher side of things. And I created an outline. I actually prepared for this, believe it or not, and figured to hit a couple things first that I think are kind of important for when you deal with a publisher and in terms of game design. Um, so I'm going to go down that outline and I'll try and use examples. Some of the examples are maybe games that you don't know, but that's why God created Board Game Geek. So if that's of interest to you, you can always go there and look stuff up. Um, since the topic is war games, I wondered how to address that initially. And I realized one of the things that's rarely discussed is the difference between war games and simulations. And I think that's a important difference to keep in mind, um, because they are not the same thing. I think there's overlap, and I think there's some divergence, and some of it is in the basics of the game, of the name, war game. It's a game, it's a contest. War, there's going to be conflict. Um, a simulation is an effort to create something to replay events in a certain fashion or to achieve um, a duplicate of what would happen in real life, such as a flight simulator program. Um, and so there are a lot of different ways to look at these things. And I tried to come up with examples. And a war game, I had monster games on my mind. And that with a war game, I consider World in Flames, which is a big monster game, to be a war game. You can take it and do a whole lot of different stuff. With some of the versions, you can even have Japan invade Panama. If you're the Germans, you can focus completely on a navy. The Russians can build a navy, for God's sake. You don't have to fight World War II as it was. In contrast, you have the older SPI game that was reprinted, I think it was by Decision Games, War in Europe. War in Europe is they're my two favorite monster games because they're both very simple to play. War in Europe forces you to follow the track of World War II. It becomes a simulation because you cannot win by invading England. You cannot really win by invading Turkey and going through that way. You're not going to win in Africa. For the Germans to win, they have to invade Russia. And no matter what you do within the game, your railroads and supply will fail in 1941 before you get to Moscow. There is we can do in a lot of different ways with like a war game. And I should also be clear, war games don't have to be about war. War is about conflict. War is about politics. So that you could create a war game about the response to a hurricane that hits Florida. You could create a war game about where people represent various institutions for a California earthquake, an economic crisis in Malaysia. These all fit into the definition of a war game. Um, Obviously, my opinion. Um, so, um, but how you approach a game is also very different, and it's a matter of style. Some of it is evolution, and in that regard, the example I came up with was World War I, and the SPI game from the 70s, the Decision reprinted called World War I. It is very abstract. where it is all about the number of people your country has and bleeding manpower. There's very little counter movement. It's make your attack, and when you attack, you lose more people than the defense did, but you really have to attack, and you go until somebody collapses. It's going to be Russia first, and then it's France or Germany, depending on the dice. So it's kind of simulation, kind of wargaming. But it's very abstract. From there, you move to an Avalon Hill game, Guns of August, which is a very traditional counters and hexes war game where you stack units. They have an attack factor, they have a defense factor, there's a combat chart, and you roll a die, somebody's dying. And then you have the evolution for the 21st century, which would be Ted Racer's Paths of Glory, where it is no longer simply just hexes and units. Now it's cards with multiple functions that are trying to eliminate the perfection of hex and counter movement, where there's no fog of war and you have perfect control. With Paths of Glory, you have a limit on what you can control, limit on your resources, and some difficult choices to make. All of these simulate, they replay World War I, but in different ways. Okay. Now, my opinion, and I have strong opinions, I get that, but they're my opinions, and Sebastian's letting me do this, so mine are right. For a product, if you're a designer, for it to be successful, you need your product to be a game. When you're looking at the general market, if you are doing this for an organization like the Department of Defense, they may want a very concrete simulation. How much action can an M1 tank take before it has to be refit? The Navy today, I think, was announcing that in case of combat, there's no way replacement ships would be available in the course of a war. Do you want the simulation or do you want the game? If you're trying to get it to a publisher, it better be a game, because inherent in being a game in the marketplace is it's got to be fun. This is not something that you do as a chore. When you have an opportunity to sit down for 15 minutes, an hour, 6 hours, or 50 hours of your time, it's going to be for something fun. Okay. Hope that makes sense. Nod your heads. It's all good. I can't see any of them, but I'll presume you're nodding your heads. So in terms of design, what comes next is I kind of wheel towards publisher sort of stuff, is there's a chicken and egg question, and neither is wrong. And that's the issue of, do you design mechanics for your game first and then put a subject matter on top of it? Or do you find a subject that interests you and then create the mechanics to fit the subject? And this, like I said, chicken and egg, you can do both. The examples I would give for this of classic designers, the one he was a great guy too. Francis Tresham designed the original Civilization board game, as well as the 18XX series of games. He did the first ones. And he would take the subject first and then put the mechanics that he felt fit the spirit of the subject into the game. So it was always about the subject first. And I think he would tell you he was most proud of his Dutch Revolution game on that. On the opposite side of it, you have Reiner Knizia, who will create the mechanics and the gameplay first, and then he will put a subject on it depending on what the publisher wants. So that if you look at the core of his games, they could fit multiple themes. And in terms of war games, I think that you have a tendency to see mechanics come first or be primary in that in instances. I think the examples I'd give of that are Battle Cry, which is the light tabletop game. But once you've played Battle Cry, you know how to play Memoir 44, even though it's Civil War and World War II, or any of the other games like that with the cards and the sets of 4 units, whether it's the Roman era or the medieval. The mechanics came first, and the theme is superimposed on it. I think Squad Leader is a game where that was the case. If you knew John Hill's systems, you would know that the sequence of play for Squad Leader is very conveniently pretty much the sequence of play for Johnny Reb, his Civil Wars rule set that he did before for, who was it, Adventure Games? Before he did Squad Leader for Avalon Hill. The mechanics were there and then adapted into the theme. So the question is, can you do a military conflict war game where you take the theme first and above the mechanics? And while I was trying to come up with this, I couldn't come up with an example of a military conflict war game. I do know from when Founding Fathers came out, the theme came before the decision on the game mechanics and how things work. The theme and the subject matter were absolutely the first thing that was determined. And well, almost determined in terms of all that. So you kind of have to decide on that. And I do think for military conflicts that it is easier to put mechanics first than theme in many instances, because we know the specifications of airplanes and ships and tanks. We you know, the studies on combat effectiveness for soldiers in battle, we have an understanding of that. Whereas putting the theme first and abstracting is a little more difficult. Actually, yeah, there we go. I just thought of one. It's sitting here on my shelf. Phalanx Games did one that's very abstract as a war game called Road to the Rhine, with 3 players competing to defeat the Germans in that regard. It does not matter if your units are infantry or tank because of what it's trying to emphasize with the logistics. They clearly had an idea for the theme first and then put the mechanics in. So hopefully that makes sense. Returns to the question of, does a war game need to be about war? And I don't think so. And I think if you go back through gaming and to the very beginning, that most games, most activities that we do for leisure are related in some symbolic way to war. I'm a volleyball coach. Sports is about competition and beating people. You can see that. Baseball is about a breakthrough and getting your man safely home, as if captured in a pocket. Track and field, I mean, it's shot put. Where do we think they got the shot from in the first place? Pole vault, leaping walls in a siege. You can see where all of this came from in war and goes into sports. In terms of games, you can see this symbolism. The capture of troops, that's the taking of tricks in something like Pinochle. You want to deny your opponent critical resources? Well, that's the purchase of property and monopoly. And that once you've cornered the market, now they've got to pay you, and you wear them out and you grind them down because their economy can't keep up with yours. If you want something about a breakthrough, well, that's an off-tackle run in football. So we have lots of examples of how this can fit into war without it being about war. So, okay, I'm gonna take a drink here for a second. Got a good question. Um, is there a particular mechanic that you think is overused or should be retired? Um, I have a couple themes that probably need to go for a while. I am personally boycotting medieval merchants and European farmers. Um, no, just won't play those games. The other one, I don't think there has been anything really innovative or unique for something on the World War II Russian front in a long time. Um, that there's not anything that makes me go, this is a brand new cool system to do that. I think there are better avenues to explore in that regard. Um, are there new mechanics to find all the time? I think that's the case. And it's not always about the invention of it. Sometimes it can be the reinterpretation. The best example of that's not directly wargaming would be Magic the Gathering. Instead of just having a card game, it becomes a game where you physically manipulate the cards to show they are currently used or not used. You select your deck rather than simply deal with 52, 55, 70 cards, whatever it may be. You get to choose what's in your deck, but you maintain the randomness. I think that that was something that never happened before in a game. And now, of course, we have that. But then through the informal creation of draft competitions for Magic, you start seeing that um, used elsewhere. Seven Wonders with play a card, pass it, so it's going to go around is a wonderful implementation of what Magic did that in that regard. Games like Dominion, where you have the cards in your hand and you're cycling them through, is a variation on it. So I don't think there's a finite limit. There may be a finite limit on the mechanics available, but not on the interpretations. As a tangent, when I was in grad school for English, I was told there are always four types of stories, and they go along with the ratings for movies. There's G stories, PG, R, and X. In G rated stories, the guy gets the girl. In the PG stories, nobody gets the girl. In the R rated stories, bad guy gets the girl. And the X rated stories is the other possibility that y'all can do. So I think gaming is the same thing. There's always going to be a board or cards or dice. It's how we incorporate those and make them different so that when you talk about the evolution and why it's popular, Twilight Struggle and what Jason and what Jason Matthews and Anthony Gupta did, that's that's that was unique. That created a whole different vibe and an argument whether that counts as a war game or not. Since it's really not about the military and it's the political side of it, but it's about the play of cards. And you can see that in the evolution of games like Paths of Glory, the World War II one like that, um, the Civil War ones, Washington's War, which used to be We the People, was it Hannibal versus Rome? Those cards, we've got a lot of different ways we can incorporate mechanics. Um, which I think is constantly amazing. The other, if there's a mechanic that I also think is underdone, it's games available for solitaire play. I think good games that are challenging where you could sit down and play it that way are far few between. I like what Dan Verson does with air games, and I actually like Elder Sign is a nice one you can just play by yourself if you want. But I think solo games are very tough to design in that regard, especially if they're also capable of multiplayer. All right, so that's kind of doesn't need to be about war in a little team. Um, but really, why you guys are here is, hey Jim, you're a publisher. What do I got to do? Um, Part of that is getting used to the word no. when you submit stuff? I do a lot of writing, and for everything I get that is accepted by a publisher, I get at least 90 no thank yous or get ignored. So that if you're going to design, you're going to have to hear the word a lot. Your choice to give up or push on. Uh, you get a very hard forehead from banging against a brick wall that way, but keep pushing forward. I try and take it that every no I get, if I get feedback with it, is an opportunity to learn. So all of that previous stuff is just kind of context. It's not really helpful for publishing. It's just context. The biggest key for getting published, first off, is make your game fun. If your game is fun, that's going to get me to want to play it and show it to other people and then them play it. If the game is fun, I will play it regardless of subject. And in some ways, if the game is something I don't know a lot about, I will be more likely to want to play it because that becomes an opportunity for me to learn about something I don't know. So I tend to be very interested in things I don't know a lot about. Was it Holland? I think Holland Games just put one out on the Russo-Polish War of 1919-1920. Great. It's on my list to eventually get around to. There was a recent game a couple years ago on the assassination of Hitler and some of the conspiracies that went in on that. Great. I'm going to look at that, but make it fun. How do you get a foot in the door? The first bit I have here is something that may actually help you with your designing. And you don't know how much time you have with a publisher if you run into them in person at like a trade show. So if you're a designer and you get the guts to come up to me and ask, hey, are you looking for something? I may have 5 other people there waiting. You have to be able to summarize your game in 1 sentence. That may be all you get. Now, if you can do your game in 1 sentence where it's appealing, now I'm going to go, oh, that sounds interesting. Now I may ignore a couple of those other 5 people to give you a little bit more foot in the door. Now, instead of just a sentence, you need to be able to explain, or you may have just a little bit extra time, you need to be able to summarize your game in the size of a tweet. So you really have 3 or 4 regular length sentences to summarize your game. So using the example of Founding Fathers, because Christian's cool and Jason's just a total loser. Multiplayer game, it's a multiplayer game about the creation of the Constitution using card-driven mechanics. Playable 2 to 5 players in 60 to 90 minutes. It can be played by kids and adults. Okay, now you've at least got a little bit more in there. Hopefully Jason's watching this so that he knows I called him a loser. Because Jason's actually a good guy, just so everybody knows that. Now you got a little more time. So now consider being able to explain your product and what it does in the space of a large paragraph, about 150 words rather than 140 characters. That at a trade show and in person, that's really all you're going to get of my time under most circumstances. But if you can do that and it sounds appealing, I'll sit there and go, why don't you come back tomorrow? Or, hey, here's my email address. Let's talk a little bit more about this another way. You're not taking a lot of their time with a sentence, a tweet, or a paragraph's worth of time. And that allows you to talk to multiple publishers all at once. When they're lined up in rows and you have 1,000 of them like you do at Gen Con or Origins. If you can't summarize your product in a sentence, tweet, or paragraph, you need to think about how you're doing that. Because that's your initial foot in the door. And some of this maybe because you're unconfident in your communication, in which case it sounds cheesy, but look in the mirror and sit there and explain what your game does. Write it down. I'm okay if you generally memorize it, because after you memorize it, you'll go off book and improvise soon enough, and that'll be fine. But there's also the possibility, if you can't narrow it down to the sentence, tweet, paragraph, is it possible your game is doing too much and there's too much going on? Or have you not focused your ideas close enough to refine it, so that is your game possibly not ready yet for it to go to a publisher? Do you need to trim some of the fat off the game? So that, bad example for this, but if you're doing a World War II game, you really don't need to elaborate the Swiss Army for me or the Portuguese armies for me. They're not important. Not if we're trying to make it look like World War II. Hopefully that makes sense. So that that point, you may want to just trim that off and explain what you're trying to do with Germany, Russia, Britain, whatever it may be. Okay. Now, I kind of skip over something here, which is, well, how do I talk to a publisher? How do I contact them? It is expected that this is going to happen at trade shows. That designers are going to come up. They may be there. You may just be there to play games, but when you come through, hey, I've got this game. Great, that's perfectly fine. And I think the good companies, especially the smaller ones, will sit there and they'll talk to you about it, even if they're not interested, from the sake of trying to help you as a designer. I think I'd say 80 or 90% of the people in gaming are good people in that regard and want to help, because I don't really care if a book is published by Random House or Penguin. I just want to read a good book. I don't care if the game is done by Multiman Publishing or Fantasy Flight. I just want to play a good game. I'll put an asterisk by that. If it turns out your company has some really bad and intolerant policies or has unethical business practices, I don't care how good the game is. I don't play them. Let's see. The other way to do it is the modern one of send an email. Email is perfectly fine. As long as I don't get what is obviously a generic cut and paste email, I'll respond with whether I'm interested or why I'm not. The email, it's okay to go for a small one and just say, are you accepting submissions? I have a game on the Vietnam War that plays in about 2 hours and I'm looking for a publisher. Without any, that's fine. I can answer on that. Or, dear Jim, I am a designer. I did not know if you're accepting designs. I have attached a one-page sheet about my game called Nuclear Death. Oh, okay, great. And then I'll look at the one-page sheet and either tell you yes or no and kind of go from there, whether it's of interest or not. If you send an email, you are best keeping it under 250 words. I get a lot of emails between my two jobs on any given day, and I am not going to sit and read 1,000 words to get to your point. I taught English. I don't have to deal with that anymore. That's the when you restate the question, what caused the Civil War? I think there are many things that caused the Civil War, and they're all important. And among the things, you've just wasted 5 lines not answering it. What caused the Civil War? Slavery, northern dominance of the economy over the South. Great. There. Your answer's done. Now we move on. Same thing. Be direct and businesslike in that regard. I won't be offended. I don't think most companies will. Their time is valuable. Your time is valuable. If a publisher's intrigued reading that 250 pages, 250 words, they'll engage with you. They'll say they're interested. They'll ask about, do you have a prototype? Can you explain further? The one thing that is really important in this, and this isn't just a gaming thing. I get this with coaching and recruiting. Your product, that athlete, your skills sell themselves. I don't need a hype video for it. I don't need music applied to it. I don't need special effects. I don't need your mom telling me how wonderful you are. Your game is your game. Here, your game is your game. You can hype it all you want, but I'm going to play that game. And I'm either going to like it or not, regardless of your hype. The catch is, if you hype it and it doesn't match the hype you gave it, I am now going to downgrade anything else you contact me with in the future because you've overhyped it, you've oversold it. I would prefer you let the game speak for itself. Simply provide me the basics, and then I'll determine if it's a good game or not. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's see here. Yeah, should mention Mark Herman on card-driven games. Truth on that. I think he does a good job with it. Another one on the mechanics. I think the coin series that Rolco does is really interesting. And that's really an untapped area of game design, is asymmetrical warfare, either in size of the opponents or in their capabilities. I think that's underappreciated. There's a really good one like that that's a diplomatic game from the 80s, and that's Grey Costikian's Pax Britannica. If you can get 7 or 8 people, actually, seven people together for that to play it over the course of a weekend, that is absolutely a rewarding game, even though it's asymmetrical. It's a brilliant design. So, okay, let's see. Yeah, yeah, Chrome sells, fat kills. I can buy that. And I kind of talk about that. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. As a publisher, I kind of think it's my job to help you with that. Like, hey, do we really need, the Spanish and Swiss and Italian armies for a game about the Narvik campaign in 1940? No, but how about we just remove those and leave them for a later date? Okay. So that becomes um, a big deal. But let the game do the selling. I'm not saying don't be proud of it. I'm not saying don't be excited about it. I expect you to be excited about something you design. I don't sending you a game. No, I expect you to be excited, but don't tell me it's the best thing that's ever been created. Don't hype it as ultra revolutionary. That's just kind of like a red flag that you're insecure and not really sure what you're doing. Be you, and let your game be your game. Okay. Um, Eventually, you're going to send something, and a publisher is going to go, "That's a great idea. Um, would like to know more." And you may sit there and you may show a video of how it's going to get played. That's all great, but I need that game in my hand, because I want to play that with people who don't know you when you're not around, so that this sounds horrible, so that we can make fun of parts of the game, so that we can compliment some, so that we can make suggestions to see where the fat is, to see if we can find a flawed mechanic, um, with the game, or a killer strategy. Um, and I think you got to be careful with those, because an unexpected killer strategy there can take a great game and make it average. It's um, it's the gaming equivalent of the Tom Cruise movie The Last Samurai, which is great for the first 2 hours and 15 minutes, and then he shoots himself in the foot, and the last 15 minutes take it down to about a 7 instead of a 10. So with the prototype, if you get asked for the prototype, be prepared. Um, Now, when you send that prototype, the surest way for me to say no is if you send me a Dropbox links or a PDF and expect me to print that off myself. I am not doing that. I already have to do that with games that I'm producing or that are in the pipeline. I'm having to do that for my own stuff and everything else. You should be able to send me the copy you're working with, without a problem. If you send files to, now, if the publisher says just send us the files, then you're okay. But expect to send the prototype. Um, what do I do for art on? What do you do for art on your prototype? I don't care. Now, I work and I'm friends with Richard Lanius, and he's the guy who did Arkham Horror and stuff. Richard is a graphic artist, by profession. Richard loves working with art. So whenever he does a prototype, it's got art that is at least 80, 70, 80% of the way towards what could be on a final product. And his conception of what the art should be is pretty doggone good and spot on. Very little really needs to be changed when he does that. If you're an artist, you can get away with that. But the most important thing with that prototype is make it clear to play. I don't care if it has zero art on it. If the cards are simply, I don't have any of my prototype cards here, black and white, where it just says text like trees, great, I know it's trees, that's fine. Um, if if you do that, I can play it and see how things work. And it leaves room for the imagination for me, or potentially an artist that may be involved in playing it, to start creatively thinking about the components in a way for publication. That's not your job as a designer. Yours is to create the product and then let the other people kind of bring it to life in that regard, to do the storyboarding. So professionals will do the art. You just make the prototype clear and playable. And in that regard, I have had prototypes submitted. Like I said, Richard Lanius likes to send near finished art. I have had them where the cards have been land cards from Magic or cards from dead collectible card games, with paper pasted on them. I have had people send cards that are the stacks of the perforated sheets of do-it-yourself business cards. Great. I don't even care if it's handwritten as long as it's legible. I just want it to be playable. So that's really the thing with the prototypes. One thing with, well, one more. Um, you need to make sure it is clear up front if you want the prototype returned to you or not. I will treat prototypes differently if I know I'm going to have to return them or not. If I'm going to return them, you'll get them sent as is. So whatever you sent me, it will be returned to you in the exact same shape that you sent it to me. I prefer not to return prototypes, especially if there's something that I'm seriously considering that's not just a lark, because then we come down to the trimming fat or making certain changes. It permits me to write on cards where I notice typos or awkward writing. It allows me to change, it allows me to tweak certain things in a way that it wouldn't be possible if I know I'm going to return it to you. Because you don't need to know my shorthand or the notes that I'm putting on there or my abbreviations. Um, and if it's something if that I'm going to publish, and it looks like I'm going to publish, I'm going to need those notes anyway here to work with the artist and coordinate with stuff, since the production process is really all over the world. Which, tangent on that, the Dietz Foundation is based in Central Illinois. My production coordinator is in Frankfurt, Germany. The artist is in Indianapolis. The primary artist is in Indianapolis, but I've used one in Canada before. The factory is in China, and the shipping company is, well, they're based worldwide. They're in Chicago. So the ability to deal with all of this while I've got it is important, because everything is going to be done at a distance. Be aware of that. That's the case for a whole lot of companies. Gaming is international. It's not a local yokel operation in that regard for established companies. So, as a publisher, what's the most common problem first-time designers have publishing their games? It is it's kind of what I talked about earlier at a trade show. Hey, I've got a game. Okay. And then you start talking, and I will be polite, but then you go on and on and on and on and on and on. No, let the game sell itself. Really practice the 30-second interaction with the person you're doing the sales pitch to. I think that is the most common issue. Another one that I've seen a lot of, was everybody. Everybody's not fair. This is not as common with war games or simulation design as general gaming. Everybody is sure that their game is the next revolutionary game, like Monopoly. They hype it, and then the game comes down to roll dice to move, suffer a consequence on a board space, or answer a question to move again. So it's either Candyland, Chutes and Ladders, or Trivial Pursuit. And that they don't understand that that is all it is. So that those designers, even if they had a reasonable theme with it, those aren't ready to go to a publisher. So I think, I guess what I'm really saying is a common mistake is sending something off before it is truly ready. The foundation, my first product is finally arriving here on June 22nd to ship out, and it's a game called 3 Years of War by a guy named Jay Little. It's about the 30 Years War. Really cool card game. I sat down to play it at a proto spiel in Minnesota and was stunned how smooth that game played at a proto spiel. I talked with Jay. I accepted it for Jolly Roger, and then stuff happened. Now it's with the Dietz Foundation. Jay had put in over 400 hours of prototype playing with other people, not himself working things out. 400 hours. That's over 400 games. And that was just the ones he supervised, not the blind play tests. He wound up going to something like a dozen proto spiels and played this with people. That game is smooth. It was completely done the minute I took it. But Jay has a lot of professional credits for publishing. And you could tell that he had put all that time in, that a first-time designer has not. So I think those are the biggies. Another one that's always of interest to me is you can tell certain designers have been doing this a long time from how their component list that they submit. There are certain things you can do to make your game less expensive to publish. And you can do this as you design the game, believe it or not. So the first is if you're using cards in your game, card sheets at printers come really in two main sizes, depending on the printer, and you can always find exceptions. Print sheets always seem to come out as sets of 55 cards or sets of 72. So if you create a game that uses 55 cards, that's one print sheet. Exactly. There's no wastage. If your game needs 54, now I'm paying to print one blank sheet, one blank card on that. It's a 2% waste of space. If you're doing 50, you can see how that works. Now, that's not a huge amount, but if you think about 2% on a $50 game, that's $1 a game. Now it's a $49 game versus a $50 game simply because of something as easy as that one missing card that we could eliminate. So if you can use 55 cards, great. The other sheet is 72, and that can basically be broken down in multiples of 18. The 55 can also go by 11s, but that's a pain. So 72, great. 90 cards, great. 108 cards, great. You hit 104 cards, now we're creating waste. I have stuff I can do with those cards, but I'm either gonna have to include them in the game, and then you're gonna get blank cards, or I'm gonna have to pay to have those cut out and sorted out and not included. I prefer not to deal with that. So that can have an effect on the impression of a game. So if you're putting it at 72 cards, you're showing you have an idea about the publication process. Game boards are the same way. Have you ever noticed that sheets on stuff happen to always be this size, whether it's folded or not? That's 8 by 11 opened wide is 11 by 17. Most of the sheets printers use will go 11 by 17. Cutting them down to the 8.5 by 11, not a problem. But when you think about map boards, if you're using a map board, trying to work it around that 11 by 17 is going to be critical. You can open it wide to 22 by 17, however you want to do that. But because those can all fold over, that's really helpful if you're wanting a mounted map board. So that's the game board size. Rule books are similar because they're printed on like the 11 by 17 sheet, and then they're stapled in the middle. Rules work better they can work by 2 pages, front and back of the 8 by 11. 4-page is even easier because that just gets folded over. So you want to try and keep your rules in multiples of 2 or 4. And I'm aware 2 is the same as 4. I get that. The catch with rules is they're not overly expensive, so that if it goes slightly over, okay, that's not going to add a whole ton of price. But still, it's one of those things. Oh, look, they provided me with 8 pages, 12 pages of rules. They've got what's going on. If your rules don't come in on that multiple of 4, my recommendation becomes use that extra space. So if you have 9 pages of rules you can't get rid of, and you use the multiple of 4, you've got 3 pages there. When you create the rules for your game, use those 3 pages for clarifications of possible weird situations or playing examples, and put those in those rules. Because when the publisher's getting ready to publish this, if it's me, I'm going to ask you to create examples of play, and I'm going to put them in the rules. If I'm playing and I have a question, I don't want to have to email you to find it out. Oh, look, he's got a question section here in the back. That's how this works. Perfect. You're going to impress me with the forethought that you've already got questions like a fact section in there. Cool. That would be great. The other one that becomes important long term is box size. It is very handy as a small company if you consider the the priority mailboxes that get sent out by the U.S. Post Office as the container for drop shipping for direct orders. If your game doesn't fit in something like that, now I got to get special boxes, pay more, take time. It's a lot easier to use those priority shipping boxes so that if your components are designed to fit inside a box that fits in that, again, that puts you ahead of the game. And the 2 examples I thought is a rough guideline for that are old VCR cassettes and the old Avalon Hill bookcase games. Maybe just a little thinner than like Paths of Glory, that size. Those are ideal sizes. They just fit inside those priority mailers. So the objective on my end is to make sure that I can direct ship that game easily to a customer. Convenient as well is those boxes are rectangular, and that means that the product inside is ideally rectangular so that in a real retail shop, they can be displayed on a shelf without wasting space. It's cool to see games that are triangles or in cylinders, but how do you display those on a shelf in a game store? Most game store shelves are crammed, so space is at a premium. And at that point, if your game is an odd shape, if it's not selling tens of thousands of copies where it's known for that shape, you run the risk of your game not getting picked up because it's not going to work well for retailers. Okay, I'll answer some questions here before going on. Let's see. How does a newbie go about playtesting his game? Protospiel is great, but what else? There are a lot of online forums where there are people, game designers. You can find a bunch on Facebook that are willing to play test it, listen to your thoughts. The only real criteria on those is that you be willing to help other people with their games. I do recommend Protospiel. They're a lot of fun. And I learned a great deal about game development by helping other people, by listening to them and their thoughts on other games and what people liked. I also have found that the people that run Protospiel are very patient, very kind, very tolerant of mistakes. They expect failure before success, and really celebrate when games that are played at Protospiels get published. It's amazing. But otherwise, you can also take it if you live near a game store. You can take it to the game store. Ask if you can run demos of it. Run the demo yourself, or better, teach the game. Ask if there are questions, and then back off and just watch. That works too. Are industry standards shifting towards mounted or non-mounted boards? And what do gamers prefer? It is a question of cost. I personally despise paper boards. Um, I prefer mounted boards every time. They're sturdier, they can be banged around. You don't wind up accidentally folding them. Um, Spills on them are more survivable than a paper map. On the other hand, Founding Fathers wound up, when I did it in its first print run with its mounted map, and it was a $45 game. If we had gone with a paper map, that game would have dropped to about $32 in terms of the retail cost. There is a lot of expense that goes into a mounted board, especially for a print run under a couple thousand. But that's ultimately going to be the publisher's decision what to do and where they're going to put the money in and where they're going to cut costs. Um, for me, with a board game, I'm going to go with a mounted board. So even though with 3 Years of War, even though the game isn't really a board game, it has a board that's needed for some stuff. It could have gone with just a construction paper placemat or poster board placemat. No, went with a mounted board. Much classier, much classier. Um, isn't rules length a formatting and layout issue? Yes, it can be, and that's partially something that the layout people will go with. But sometimes it can't be squeezed in readable fashion, and I tend to prefer larger print for rules wherever possible, and nice big pretty pictures of examples. So that, but it's something to keep in mind of what the publisher is going to prefer. Hey, these guidelines would be on a teaching aid sheet. Hey, I have given Sebastian a Word document with all of this that he'll be able to get to people later on with that's basically the outline I've done for this. Um, Thoughts, Command, Modern Operations. Um, I haven't played it, don't know it. So that's from John. I'm sorry, can't answer that. So Sebastian wants people to buy stock in it. Do not listen to stock advice that you get online from a non-professional. That could be insider trading. We could all wind up in jail. Um, so, um, well, see, and now here we're talking about that, and Command's going to wind up from DoD analysts and how they use it. There you go. That's only 2 months away. I put my poster maps in poster frames. Yeah. When you're making a prototype, if you're doing game boards, like poster frames or a piece of plexiglass can be an amazing friend of yours, for holding stuff down, writing, and changing stuff. Um, Aaron, you're the one that said, "Don't be sorry." It's a great tip. I had never actually thought about the poster frames. I've used plexiglass, a big thing of plexiglass. That's a nice dirt cheap tip. And when you're making prototypes, you're trying to keep your costs low. That's that's just a great idea. Yay. I'm giving you $5 internet for that. So, um, okay. Um, this is kind of back to the prototype thing and the publication side. I mentioned box size and rule size and the number of cards. One of the games that the foundation has under development, I had mentioned all this to the designers. We were talking, and it has like 93 cards. It's a completely horrible number. And he's like, "Oh my God, I'll have to cut this." But here's the reality: this is going to be brilliant. It's going to be a awesome game, and it's going to be expandable, and it's going to be playable, and I think it's going to represent real world military tactics in a good abstract fashion and be playable and all that. So even though I just said try and keep it to 72 cards or 55 cards, it's 93 cards. It's going to be 93 cards because this game requires that number of cards for it to be excellent. And a good publisher, a smart publisher, will not compromise excellence for the sake of saving $1 off the retail. So that if you've got 85 cards right now, you go, girl. It's all good. But I think knowing some of this stuff in advance while you're thinking about your game is important before you ever create prototype version 0.01. So let's see. Oh yeah, here's one. Here's a first timer mistake that this one will get pretty much every game company in the world to either ignore you or immediately say no. Should I copyright my game? No, no. If you copyright your game, I will reject it immediately without ever opening anything on your email other than I've copyrighted my game. Boom, gone instantly. There are zero exceptions to that bad boy. Because all that copyright does is insinuate there will be legal hassle down the road. And that's I'm a small company. I'm not going to deal with that crap. It's like helicopter parents. That's being a helicopter designer. The reality with game mechanics is they can't be copyrighted at all. I could take your design, change the name, change 4 hexes on a map of 5,000 hexes, change 2 rules in the game that are irrelevant, claim it as mine, and you can't do jack about it. By the way, that's absolutely horrible. And I can tell you that from having had a game ripped off that way by another game company. That is unacceptable. So you send me that copyright, yeah, no, it's just going to be in trouble. There is an implicit level of trust when you submit that, and an understanding that what you have sent in is your game. But you're copywriting the Pearl Harbor attack. Man, I thought the Japanese did that in December 1941. So I'm too old for that, and that's going to be, you're going to want to micromanage stuff. And to me, that's unacceptable, and I'm not going to do that. So don't copyright it. The fact that you're sending it to me, I acknowledge your receipt, it's going to show that I got the game. The other issue is that if you copyright it, as a publisher, if I try and do anything like that to protect the company's intellectual property for what I've brought in, now it gets really complicated. And it ain't worth half the profits that could be made, especially since I fund scholarships with them, to pay for a lawyer, because lawyers are evil. Always remember that. Like mothers-in-law. Okay, so don't copyright the game. Then we have, kind of related to the company that ripped me off. You have it's happened twice in different ways. You have the ethics of game submission to a publisher. It is acceptable, much like it is with writing and submitting stories and novels, to submit a game to multiple companies at the same time, provided they say it's okay. Some companies will say, we don't want it submitted to multiple places. Well, then don't do that. But you may submit it to multiple companies at once, as long as you tell those companies you've done that. Just tell me, hey, Jim, I also submitted this to Yellow, Days of Wonder, and Matajo. Okay, great. I'm okay with that. And just make sure you're being honest with all things. Honesty will not get you in trouble. Now, to be fair, if you send it to multiple companies, most will downgrade it as a priority rather than upgrade it or be impressed by that, because it comes across as you're trying to pressure the company to look at it quicker. They don't want to do that, nor are they going to get into a bidding war with somebody else fictionally. That's how you get baseball free agents making $50 million a year. Sometimes they bid against themselves. No. So you're not putting the pressure on them that way. You kind of look desperate. And that doesn't help the decision process on your end. It doesn't help it get submitted. So while it is possible to send games to multiple publishers, you're better off doing it one at a time. If a prototype is requested, as I mentioned earlier, perfectly acceptable to ask if it could be returned, and to ask how long the evaluation process will take. For me, usually it's 2 to 4 weeks. It really depends on when you send it to me and if I'm in the middle of volleyball season. Some game companies get so many submissions, it may be a year before they have an answer for you. You have to decide for yourself how much patience you have with your prototype sitting there at that game company. And that's really up to you. So if the other part of the ethics is a while ago when I was Jolly Roger, I accepted a game, loved the game. Designer, this is great. Sent the designer the contract. He said, I got it. I'm going to sign it. It's going to go in the mail. Great. I contacted the factory. Going to get this bad boy set up because I'm going to be able to sell this. I didn't hear back from the designer. Designer suddenly does not answer email. Remembering that we had an agreement, everything was set, royalty rate, etc. Don't hear from the designer. We're now a decade or so later. I still haven't heard from the designer, but that game was published by somebody else who also knew that I had accepted that game, contacted the designer behind my back, and then paid a better royalty on it. That's unethical. Okay. I get that it was probably more money. That's fine. I do not accept unethical behavior. I can't do business this way. So that really bothers me. So if you make an agreement with a company, keep it. Okay, that's important because that designer, and I won't do it here, I won't tell you even if you email me, but I made sure that certain people knew who did that to me. And then I made sure to let other companies know who did that to me so that they would be aware if that designer contacted them again, or if that company asked a favor or something, of the level of integrity and ethics involved there. Never compromise ethics, integrity, and honesty for the sake of 1% extra on your royalty rate. Gaming is too small for that to not get around. And I cannot emphasize that enough. The world, preachy now, the world has enough shenanigans going on with people avoiding morality, ethics, integrity. Don't add to it. Okay. I hope that's not sounding too old crotchety. Okay, next step. So we've got the prototype, you got the contract. And in terms of the contract, I have also sent to Sebastian for everyone to have. I sent him what I called, it's like boilerplate example contract. I think that's what I called it. Let me see. Boilerplate contract sample. That is a generic contract, nice and simple. It's based on something that was sent to me a long time ago by Alan R. Moon from when he ran White Wind games, because it covers everything and it's nice and simple and it's in plain English. There's nothing, you're going to see, there is nothing in there that is sneaky or anything else. Yeah, there it is. The one thing I did change some of the prices and stuff on there. I changed all the numbers around. So you're not getting a royalty of 30% on a game. No, not, that's even more than like George Lucas gets for licensing. So that file, I mean, if he sends you the copy, you can look at that. By all means, please feel free to copy that. If it winds up you aren't able to copy that, you can contact Sebastian or me and can send you the Word document. Let me close. Well, I got one thing here. So looking at this, licensor and licensee. That's gonna be me and you. So you can see where it's like X is me and fill in your address and designer name is you. Name, game. So we got that defined. Basically, notice on the first and second ones, essentially the second one, licensee, me, will have complete control over all matters involving the manufacture and sale of the game. That means that if I want to take your game about the German invasion of France and I want to make it dogs attacking kittens, I am completely within my right to do that. You have no say at that point once this is signed. Now, I don't do that because you're going to talk to people about me and what I did to your game, etc. But when you sign a contract for a game, you're handing your baby over to that publisher, and you have to accept that your baby's all grown up and out in the free world. I think it's important. You'll note line 3 there that your name goes on the rules, your name goes on the box top. That becomes important. Line 4, okay, I put 30% royalty rate because I think that's funny and I have a weird sense of humor. The royalty rate is really a wide range from about 3 to 10%. A lot of that may depend on how experienced you are. It may depend on any number of factors. It may depend, and we would have to change this if there are co-designers. So that when like Jason and Christian did Founding Fathers, we came up with a rate, and then there was a second line there that the royalty rate will be split equally between the two designers. Line 5 is about an advance. I pay a royalty advance of $1. A lot of established designers their games will sell regardless. If you commission them for work, they demand an advance. And you know you're going to get quality from them, so they want the money up front. I don't have the money to give up front in most cases, but they know me for the ethics side of things. They know I'm legit, that once I sign a contract, that game will see the light of day. So in this case, this line is there so that they can say they get an advance on every game they design. And I'm only out $1, which is within my budget. And you'll note that it says it can be waived by the licensor. Great. So that's all been covered that way. Upon signature, the royalty. I give each designer 12 copies of the game as soon as I can get it to them. They are then able to purchase reasonable additional copies of it, equal to the cost of the game wholesale plus the mailing expense. And the wholesale price is 40% of the retail. So if a $50 game, the designer for the extra copies is going to wind up paying $20. This is per print run, whether that's in here or not, so that every print run I do, they'll get 12 copies of the game automatically, and then able to buy, yeah, more than I got paid as an adjunct too. You'll wind up getting 12 copies every print run. The electronic version of the game, the split is really dependent on the likelihood of it happening, and the ability of the designer to facilitate that. If you know somebody who designs computer games and can create the app for it, you're likely to get 60 to 65% of that share. If I'm the one that's finding the computer person, hammering out the bugs and everything else, you're going to be down at 25 or 30%. It is an insanely wide range. My recommendation is somebody who designs games, I wouldn't let that, that's not where you make your stand on. That's not a non-negotiable, my opinion. You'll note line 8, I require the designers now to help with the Kickstarter program and the things for it, whether it's the designer how to play or not. You'll note it says 21% royalty rate there. That's also negotiable. Technically, a contract, you're going to get that set royalty rate for the entire print run. But with Kickstarter, in most cases, I'm generating more money, or the print run is going to be larger than expected, so that your help, this is your pay essentially as a designer for helping, for creating those videos and the other aspects of the Kickstarter campaign. And you'll see it's left vague. Other Kickstarter help considered quote unquote normal. Okay. Send a statement of accounts no later than January 30th showing what units sold and royalties owned. This is set up, I believe that that I pay licenses once a year, the way this sample's set up. Ultimately, that's up to the designer. It's common for it to be quarterly or biannually, so twice a year. That's between you and the publisher. Quarterly, biannually, annually, whatever it is, but you're entitled to know how many copies were sold, how many remain in inventory. Then I believe on the next page, it talks about what happens after the game is over. On termination of this agreement, like I decided I don't want to print it again, you decide I'm a butthead. All rights, for me, all rights to the game revert to the designer. This is the Avalon Hill problem. There are still numerous Avalon Hill and Victory games that do not see the light of day because who holds the rights to the game contractually and what the contract says isn't clear. And nobody wants to pay thousands of dollars to a lawyer to find out something that won't work in their favor. I make it simple. When I'm done with your game, you get all rights to your game back. The exception to this is the artwork. The artwork rights revert to the artist, which to me makes sense because they're the artist. Line 15, I won't transfer our agreement without your consent unless I get purchased from another company. Okay, that line needs to leave from the Dietz Foundation ones because I can't be purchased from another company. I would have to dissolve myself since I'm a nonprofit. So that wouldn't matter with me. But as a generic contract, there you go. This pretty much covers everything. So does that make sense there on the contract for everybody? I'm hoping so. I'm hoping so. Okay, let's see. So, do I have any favorite publishers as a designer? No. I don't. It is to me like books. I don't go and find Random House books. I will seek out certain designers. There are certain things that I like in games. Sometimes of certain types. I'm friends with Richard Lonnie. I did Cthulhu stuff. His Cthulhu stuff is great. I love Cthulhu and what he does with Cthulhu stuff. It's fun. I enjoy the card-driven games a great deal. I think Twilight Struggle has held up now more than a decade, 15 years. It's a great game. I think the World War I, the Paths of Glory is really good, other than the really harsh supply lines. But I love it, and we just play, hey, you're going to be in trouble there. So I tend to go for types of games and designers and rather than publishers. So not in that contract is I don't have in a contract. I never cut the designers out. It's your baby. You want it to come out as awesome as possible, so that during the development process, hey, can we change this rule? Is your game, can we do this? Do you mind if can we cut 2 cards for this purpose? Do you mind if it goes in this size box? I'll send them the art samples. What do you think of the art? Do you like this art? So that, like, the next game that's coming up is a race car game set in the 1920s and 30s. So rather than just standard stock car art, the art's going to be inspired by the racing posters for various races from the 1930s. So it's going to have this, it's kind of this weird, weird's not the right word, Soviet propaganda colory sort of look to it. It looks really awesome. The designers really liked that, and then had a couple suggestions that they knew because of their expertise in racing of old posters to mimic. If I exclude the designers from this conversation and this process, I don't learn that, and I miss out on a couple of good ideas that way. By the way, thanks for bearing with me. This is actually taking longer than I thought to go through all this. So I hope it's all worthwhile. Technology and apps. I won't look at a game that requires an app to play. And I don't actually think it's wise for you to create it because tech for tech's sake is not great. The practical reality is you're going to create that app and it's going to work now. But what happens when we go to Windows 15 or mobile operating system Z and suddenly your game doesn't work anymore? Are you going to provide the updates for that in 1, 3, 5, or 10 years? Because if you don't, you're selling something that's going to become obsolete without really telling the people that are playing it that it's obsolete. And that worries me. I don't really care for that. Now, if it is something like, well, I'm like vibrating here. Woo. If it's something like a Vassal module or something for basic online play, was it like tabletop simulator? I totally get that. And that's something where, again, it's not in my hands, so that that becomes okay. So that's really the apps. Communicate, and there are a couple more questions I'll answer. While I'm evaluating it, don't pester me. If I tell you a month, I'll get back to you within a month. If you send me an email, it's like, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? No, we're not there yet. Shut up. Don't make me stop the car. Same sort of things. If I find faults with your game or I have critiques, please don't get defensive with that. My objective is not to tell you you're a loser or that your game sucks. I will be polite about that. It is to find out things that may be flaws or to find out the designer logic behind it so I understand it better. This is going to sound a little odd. Richard Launius designed Arkham Horror. The way it is published, I don't care for the game. But I've had the privilege, and it's a lot of fun, to play with Richard and his home rules that he uses. Oh my God, that's a blast. And I much prefer his home rules. And a lot of those are things they didn't want in the game. Okay, whatever. So, but with the faults and stuff, Jason Matthews, he's a great guy for dealing with that with prototypes. You have a problem while you're playtesting, the dude keeps a black felt marker with him, and in the middle of a game, he'll start cheating and crossing out text and replacing with new text to see how it works. So I love that. Be open to the criticism you get. You may not agree with it, but if you keep your mind open, it may even spur something else that causes you to make one other change, think of something else better, or it may even spur a different design, which is fine. Okay, I'll get to the questions here in a minute, but so kind of wrapping up what I've got here in my notes. Don't be a salesman, be you. If mechanics come easy to you rather than theme, that's fine. If you have cool mechanics for your game, a publisher will work with you to find a really great theme for those mechanics. If theme comes first, that's cool. Since this is about wargame design, I do think it's important to consider what you are trying to model or discuss and what's important. I wrote a blog a couple days ago about this and certain issues in games. With Founding Fathers, Jason, we were accused of being too liberal. Jason's a Democrat. Don't log off. I'm still a Republican for some reason. And Christian is unaffiliated. He's an independent. So we cover all the spectrum. We tried to produce a nonpartisan game. Now, here's the thing. We knew that wouldn't be the case. We knew it was going to be discussed. It's politics. It's about the Constitution. We want that to be discussed. But you need to be aware of your bias as a designer and what you're bringing in and what you're emphasizing. For Founding Fathers, the emphasis was on making sure it was multiplayer and could be finished in under 2 hours. That was the primary thing, and it would be approachable for somebody who doesn't know anything about the Constitution or American history. We incorporated that in. We chose intentionally to remove some of the details that would have made it more historical and more of a simulation, more for a policy wonk sort of thing. We took those out intentionally. Design decision. So if you're doing a war game, since that's what this is supposed to be about, I'm going to look at how do you treat logistics? Is it simply as long as you can trace a direct line back to your home capital, you're good? That's your logistics? Or is there separate charts for it? Or do you go campaign from North Africa insane and have rules for the Italians eating spaghetti away from the coast? There is a point it's too much. How do you deal with production? What are you going to abstract? What's going to be concrete in this? How are you abstracting production? Is it Third Reich basic resource points? Or are you going to have to keep track of manpower and industrial points and shipping? How are you doing that? How are you going to abstract combat? If I designed a miniature system for like operational level ones for World War II, you don't get to know if a tank is destroyed or not. It's about combat cohesion. There's no direct damage. You don't get to know if a tank had its turret blown off or anything else like that. I don't consider that important at that level. Some people do. The Tobruk system, it's going to care if it's an immobilization, an armor penetration, a tank destroyed, 5 guys killed, 9 guys killed. What's your level of abstraction going to be? Or are you going to go with combat factors on a combat results table? How do you handle fog of war on a board game? How do you handle the friction of war? And I think that that's an area where mechanics can be improved. I think that frictions, it works pretty well with the card-driven games. But I think that's something that could use some work professionally and for the commercial market. With your game, if I try and apply real military tactics to a war game, am I more likely to succeed, or do I have to use game tactics? Do I have to use something like a soak-off attack, where I sacrifice one of my units to attack 2 hexes of yours so I can gain an advantage somewhere else? That's not realistic. That's playing the game. Or is there an advantage for combined arms? How does air power, land power, sea power interact? And then the other question that goes on with that is, does the game feel right? Do I feel like this is the subject I'm supposed to be dealing with? So that's what I have, which now leads to the rest of the questions that are here. As a publisher, what conflicts have been overdone? East Front, World War II. Anything you can put the SS and Nazis in has been done. There is an old industry saying that if you put a swastika or a German soldier on the front, you will sell 2,000 extra copies. Sadly, that's probably true. Same with Confederate soldiers. For whatever reason, people like losers. I think that conflicts that need more attention. I've only ever seen 2 games ever on Weimar Germany, and the one that's out is really good, but it's not how I would have approached it. I've asked Ted Torgerson to revisit a game called Free at Last on the civil rights movement. There are none like that. I think things like the Constitution, I don't think the politics of antebellum America has been addressed very well. And the whole issue and tug between Northern industrialization and Southern slavery, I think that's been done poorly, rarely. I think rebuilding, a couple of interesting ones would be the politics of rebuilding Europe and Japan after World War II. I don't think those have been done very well. Why did I choose a nonprofit? I ran Jolly Roger for 20 years, and I sold it to a large company, and I received a fair amount of money. In life, I have lived reasonably well, worked hard, saved money, made my money, and enough to be happy. I don't really need much. And it dawned on me that everybody in the world wants to complain and moan and point fingers, and that included me. And I realized I could be doing something. Well, I realized I missed running a game company. And so I decided to create a nonprofit that I went back through some of the numbers, and with Kremlin, if I had taken the profits I made from Kremlin, I could have endowed 6 college scholarships. 13 days would have been like 4. So over the course of Jolly Roger and the games that I had that were profitable, I could have endowed in perpetuity 50 college scholarships. There could be 50 kids going to college right now with some or all of college paid for. But I lined my pocket. But what you have to do in life, you got to pay for stuff. Well, I don't need to now. So I'm going to try and do this the right way and pay for kids that want scholarships, try and fund scholarships for people going into education, but also to help teachers incorporate games and alternative learning methods into their classrooms. And that's kind of how we got to the nonprofit. Do I have advice for young students designing war games and hoping to publish their games? Be honest, have integrity, get used to hearing the word no, and practice. You're going to hear the word no 90 times for every yes you hear. But the reality is, I think for every 9 games you design, 8 are total crap. I don't mean that bad. They're wrong in some way. That it's a product that, wow, this is completely wrong. You have to scrap it and restart and rebuild from ground zero. Don't feel pressured if you put 20 hours or 50 hours into something and you realize you've hit a dead end. Don't let your ego get in the way. Admit you reached a dead end, learn the lesson of the dead end, and use that lesson to rebuild in a different fashion and make it better. Do I take submissions by Vassal or Tabletop? No, because technology hates me. I am very much in that regard, a tactile, old school person. It has also not helped that I am on my cell phone with recruiting constantly, and I actually need time away from technology. Gaming for me should be social and something done face to face wherever possible. And so, no, I don't. Now, if that was really the only way you could get it to me because you designed it and you're in Buenos Aires, okay, we'll figure something out. Let's see. What's the first thing I look for in a game proposal? It's the theme. For me, it's the theme. Is this something that could be unique? Is this something now that could be educational? That's the first thing that's going to appeal to me is the theme. Do I I know ways to organize and process feedback during testing. This is going to be my educational response. When I was a student, my notes were set up for my brain. And so if other people wanted to copy them, they always looked like, well, I don't even know what this means. My comment was like, yeah, dude, you should have been there. You're only copying my notes. And I don't want to, I can't, I tend to put everything down in one big list, pell-mell and all chaotic. And then when I sit down to revise, I will organize it after the fact. I won't organize it in that moment. I will take that day to reflect, and then I'll look back on the comments. I know, like I was saying with Jason and Christian, they sit there and in the moment scratch off the card and put new text. And if they've got to replace that new text, out goes the card. They draw up a new card and pop that bad boy down in the moment. Whatever works for you is good. I pass no judgment on that. So if you work best by talking into a recorder, do it. Typing it, do it. Handwriting it, do it. Notes on the cards, do it. It's all about making your product better. So that's the questions I've got listed here. Does that answer everything for everybody? I mean, I'm happy to help with anything. Let's see here. I'll send you guys here in the I just typed in my email address and the foundation website. Hopefully Sebastian will forgive me here. The foundation is nonprofit. I take donations. Part of the charter for the foundation is that if I receive donations, I do not use those to produce games. Those go directly into the fund for scholarships. So that if you send a donation, that's not going to get used for anything other than helping kids in some fashion. That's actually a promise in that regard. So, but I'm happy. Any other questions?
All right. It seems like we have the questions all answered for today's webinar. Oh, do we have one last one from Merrill?
Oh, yeah, just email me. Yep, email me, and I prefer to work that way.
All right. Thank you, Jim, for your wonderful presentation. The audience was super engaging. For those who have questions, we have put the contact info for Goose in the chat, which is at guws@georgetown.edu. You can check this webinar on our YouTube page later tonight, and you can sign up for our newsletter and our wargaming resources via our website at guwargaming.org. And please thank Jim for his wonderful time and expertise in sharing how to design for publication. Thank you again, Jim.
You're welcome. Always happy to help. Rising tide floats all boats.